approve. I second.
Okay, any discussion, changes?
Is that Rick and Walker?
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Number 3, well, we're moving through this. Appointment of a secretary. We need someone to take notes here, take the minutes, submit the minutes, and I wonder if this also includes, we got a note today from the town saying,
Carol Smith, yeah,
from Carol,
yeah.
that it has to be posted physically, not just up on the Plainfield People. So I'm guessing the secretary is going to do that. We were bold enough to ask Kirsten if she was interested in the job. Okay. With no objection, can we appoint Kirsten as the secretary? Kirsten. I'm sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
No, it's not okay. It ought to be right.
Do we need a formal motion to do that
Or a vote?
or vote? Just
Sure, let's do it.
To make it formal.
Yep, let's do it.
I appoint Kirsty as secretary.
A second, I'm sorry.
Go for it.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Congratulations.
First, excuse me, Donnie, but Kirsty, do you want me to be, I took the minutes last time just unofficially. Do you want me to just keep taking them or do you want to start taking them? If you're willing to, that'd be awesome.
Sure.
Okay, I've got the first part, so I can send you that.
Just a note here, Bram's AI note taker is also recording.
Yeah, so actually I had to stop by the town office earlier today and Bram did mention that he set this up and he said he was gonna pass along the information in case it would be helpful with the note taking. It does, I think the select board has it as a little bit, my understanding from Dan Thing is the select board has it as like a little bit of a backup resource, but it usually is not the official minutes because it's like pretty voluminous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Karen Hatcher.
Hi, so I was invited, and I'm assuming you're wanting information about possible grants to help fund the project. Am I right?
Correct.
Just making sure I know what I'm here for. Okay, great. So there are, at this point, I'm aware of 3 different pots of money that could potentially help support the project. And each of them is federal money. So take that for what it's worth at this point, because everything in the federal government is, you know, whatever it is. So we'll operate based on what we know today. And hopefully that'll still be there when we need it. There are two grant pots that are what we call community development block grants. One is the standard community development block grant, and the other is what they call community development block grant, DR, which is disaster recovery. That's a special funding pool that just became available. We're still waiting on, but I'll give you, so there's those two. And then there's something called the Catalyst Program through the Northern Borders Regional Commission. There's these 3 places that I think, at this point, knowing what I know about the project and what's been developed at this point, would, I think, come into play. So just to give you just a little bit of background. So CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, the standard one has a maximum of $1 million you can apply for. It is primarily for affordable housing and infrastructure that supports affordable housing. So right in the wheelhouse for the project, could apply for that. And the $60,000 planning grant that just happened, that we just got approval from the board to sign off on, right, and apply for, is through CDBG VCDP. So sorry to do this to you, but it's for my community development program, right? So it's a planning grant through the same entity, and the hoops that you have to jump through for CDBG, much like we had to do for this planning grant, they tend to be fairly extensive and they take time. So it's, federal money in general takes longer and needs a lot more, some of you know this, but it needs a lot more permitting and approvals and inspections and things like this. So CDBG $1 million available that you could apply for. CDBG DR, special funding that happens connected to a disaster and usually follows on a disaster about 18 months after. So if you think about it, this money is connected to the 2023 flood, right? So we had some damage then. We didn't have the same kind of damage. So there's a question with the folks who at HUD, which is where this money comes from, about whether Plainfield is eligible for this, for a part of this DR funding. The case is being made at the state with HUD that Plainfield should be eligible for this money. Because if you look at what followed on in 2024, you could make the case that it started in 2023 and it was a result, right? So people are fighting for us to be able to be included. We heard that. They're also figuring out how to divide up the money in such a way that there's flexibility and they can make some of the mitigation money available to us. So at the end of March, we went for an information meeting, Carl Bissix and I, and we learned that of the $57 million that's been allocated to Vermont, 67 million, 54 million has to go to Washington County and in Lamoille County, Johnson, the town of Johnson. So a lot of the money is going to come to Washington County, but Montpelier, Barry, right? There were a lot of people in that room who were representing different towns, and we all want money. We all need money.
And that's 2023.
Hmm?
And that's 2023 specific.
Well, tied to 2023, and we know that that Barry and Montpelier had significant flooding and damage, right? So we're in the mix. We don't know how much. What they have told us is that of the monies that are going to be allocated, the bulk will be for housing and infrastructure. So again, in the sweet spot of the project, so potentially there, right? So depending on what we get, what we're told we can apply for. And infrastructure can be funding for infrastructure projects to support community resilience and to support housing projects, roads, sewer, water, etc. Again, that fits. Northern Borders is a little different. Northern Borders likes to hop onto other funding stacks, as they call them, and add to a project to finish a project and get it done. It's a 50% match though, so it's like CDBG is 10%, but Northern Borders is 50%. So it's, and you can, they have $100,000 grant for feasibility that we could apply for. We need feasibility. Then there's up to $1 million you can apply for an implementation grant. So there's funds there as well. The interesting thing about that is that the person who oversees Northern Borders for our area for Vermont lives here in Plainfield. So that's lovely. And she's very helpful. So we have some connections. So those are three places kind of right off the bat, depending on what the timing of the project is, because consider that all of the federal money takes time to get. We don't think CDBG DR is going to be available till the end of the year. It was supposed to be earlier than that, but we are in now the middle almost of April. We were supposed to hear already. Yeah.
When you say the end of the year, do you mean the federal fiscal year or the end of the
The
calendar
calendar
year?
year, the end
Okay.
of 2024.
Okay.
Yeah. So if, you know, if the project pushes into next year, then lining up grant money, you know, essentially, it's going to take that long to do it. But if that's important to the project and to have it in the budget, then it's worth going for.
Is that for which flood is that for, the 2023 or
For which one? For Northern Border?
for the, when the availability for the, ER is?
DR is
DR.
DR is connected to the 2023 flood.
Okay.
But we're looking for a weigh-in.
And did you get any word about whether there would be another round of that?
There will not be.
There will not be.
They said, considering what's happening and that it's an 18-month follow-on to the flooding, if you think about what's going on right now in Washington, we're not gonna see another pot of money like this, yeah.
Okay, so, when will we know whether or not we even qualify and can apply, and what are the, timelines for applying and?
$1 million question right
Yeah.
there. I'm calling every week to speak with Ann Kroll at, the Agency of Commerce.
Yep,
And, so far, and she's been calling HUD and we still don't have an answer. So
so you don't have an answer to whether or not we qualify?
we don't have an answer to that, and none of us have heard about when it's out, when eligibility opens and the criteria for eligibility.
Okay.
Nobody's heard it.
So you don't,
So
yeah.
we're all waiting. We were
Yeah.
supposed to hear the first week of April.
Okay,
and
okay,
I-
and you just,
So
yeah,
we have no answers.
Yeah.
About any of it at this
Yeah.
point. That's all I know on that.
So is that first step eligibility and then second step when the money will come?
It would be eligibility and how much they've allocated, I think, to the kinds of things that we'd be looking for. And then it would be, and also what's possible, though I don't know, is they could do a set aside for us and not have it be competitive, right? Because they know what we had happen here. And so it could be that, and I would love that because that would just make my life easier. But I think if they said, well, we're gonna carve out, $3 million for Plainfield, that would be a beautiful thing, because then we could just go back to them with, here's how we'd like to use that. But I don't know that yet.
I was gonna say, like, following up on that, how, obviously, everything is shifting and influx, but like, how likely do you think it is that they might set aside funds like that? Is that something that you've seen?
You know what? It's hard to predict, but what I can say is I've been amazed at how supportive folks at the state have been to our case and how sympathetic they are. And like, if you look, I have the meeting was recorded, the hearing, and there's a 5-minute interchange between myself and Ann Kroll about this. And I'm happy to share that link. I shared it with Ariane if you
Yeah.
want to share it with folks. But it's just this little interchange where she says, we are making the case to HUD that you should be included. And if they tell us no, we're gonna go back. So I believe they're gonna give it their best shot to get us in. But I don't know that, and I'm hoping any day that we get information about this, but
Karen, could our congressional delegation be helpful in
I think.
helping greasing the skids from this? And is there anything we should do about that?
Interesting. I think they have been made aware, but I think it wouldn't hurt to, if they have contacts at HUD to be able to reach out on our behalf. Peter Welch's office, I think, was key in getting this funding to actually happen,
Mhm.
for the state. So maybe it wouldn't hurt if folks have that contact to reach out.
Maybe we should write them a letter as a committee, and send it to our 3 congressional
Wouldn't
delegates.
hurt. Couldn't hurt.
And then call, maybe even follow up with that.
Yeah.
I have a question. So the CDBG grants for both the disaster recovery and the normal one are both connected to affordable housing, correct?
Yeah,
So is it,
and
Does the
infrastructure,
project need
and
to be-
infrastructure.
and
So
infrastructure?
So CDBG standard, the standard one is primarily affordable housing, really tied to that. And the DR is affordable housing infrastructure, and it has some hazard mitigation money in it and some other things, but
So does it need to be, does a project need to be like entirely affordable housing, or can it be like, okay, we're gonna do 30%?
no, there is a percentage though, it has to be see, our village qualifies because it's 70%. Whatever that number is of, lower to mid income.
Yeah.
Right, so we qualify by virtue of where it's located.
Okay,
Right, so, you don't have to, I think it is also helpful that if the sale to Down Street and to Habitat go through, right? If they buy those lots and they put affordable on.
Yeah.
That strengthens the case, right? Because there will be affordable housing on that property.
It's not as restrictive. It's not like,
No,
you can't house other people that are affected that aren't low income.
no, it's not that. But I do think, I think the downstreet housing would be into perpetuity affordable, right?
Yeah.
That's the way they're setting that up, so.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, just so I'm clear, the DR funding does not have a match. I just want to make sure, I think I
Oh,
misspoke.
yeah.
So just the
10%.
CDBG is 10%. But,
Just to be clear, we put up 10%, they put up 90.
that's right.
Okay,
You
and the
get
other one's
90.
50-50.
You get, yeah, and
Okay.
then Northern Borders is 50/50.
And these, the DR and normal grants can be applied for. They're not exclusive of each other, right? Like.
That's
technically-
correct. You can build them. You
Yeah.
can stack your funding. So what you know, what you would want to do is try and get as much as you can get and have them, they know how to work with each other.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful because we don't know how to do this, but they do, and they can and have done many projects. So if we get there, we know how much we can ask for, then what I would do is if this group forms a finance team or a fundraising team or whatever that is, if you have a smaller group that's working just on the money, then what I would do is want to interact with that group and then maybe bring Pat Moulton in from the state and get some other people who can help really kind of pull together all the pieces to be able to put the funding package together.
Yeah, like how much can we lean on you as a committee? How?
I'm a volunteer like you are. You know, it's right now, the infrastructure has been taking most of our time because we've been dealing with FEMA
Yeah.
and federal highway, and we are coming to a place where the inspections have been done and the projects have been submitted, and so we're kind of at a place where we're putting things back on their desks, and then so things are kind of moving, I want to say off of mine, but I will support as much as I can, and you know, I've been working with Arian to this point, and Arian is understands grants as well and has done a lot of that in his career. So, you know, I'll continue to interact and support and help us in however I can and bring resources to the group. Because that's how we've been working, because none of us has all this experience or information. And so we just pull people who know how to do it to Plainfield.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Northern Borders grant and what the timeline parameters are around that?
Yeah,
And
so
one last question about that, so you can just
give me the whole
feel.
thing.
Yeah, and then the 50% match, can that come from anything?
It can't come from other federal money. So you
Okay.
can't match federal with federal.
Gotcha.
And they had a spring round and they'll have a fall round of funding. It's competitive. Northern Borders is Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, I think. So it's a competitive grant. And you know, the strength of the grant will have to do with how much other funding we've been able to bring to the project, because they look for that. So, we'll get information in the summer about the fall grant cycle. So we'll know what the criteria and all of that is and what the application process.
And is this like ongoing, like it's just perpetual, spring and fall
So far,
application? Right, I mean, I know, we don't know what tomorrow brings, but given what we know right
so
now,
far.
yeah,
Okay,
okay,
yeah, we do know
Started
that.
in 2008.
okay, okay.
It's
So
around, yeah, if you look at it, it's the funding comes from a different place, and it's a different funding pool.
So did you say that, I thought, you said that we might find, that we were supposed to find out the first week of April
Yes,
about whether we can apply in eligibility, and you expect that almost any day?
that's true.
Will you let us know when that happens? Okay.
Yes, of course. You might hear me woo-hooing
Yeah.
from Country Club Road. Yeah.
And maybe Arian,
I'll have to turn up my hearing aids.
maybe those who are on the has been on the steering committee more with more, but is there other pots for actual feasibility studies, do you think? Like more local engineering?
We can,
grants, et
if
cetera?
that's a priority, so,
That's kind of a.
yeah, I think if that's a need, then we go looking.
Yeah.
And just to speak to that, one of the biggest challenges with grant funding cycles is timing, because it's like the bigger the grant, the longer the lead time is, you know, it's like, oh, you know, you want to apply for $1 million grant, it's gonna take a year plus, you know, you wanna, this $60,000 feasibility study that was just voted on by the select board, and we've got a few documents to get in by Monday. That's a shorter lead time, it's a much smaller pot of money. You know, and then we have been lucky so far with some private philanthropic organizations like the Vermont Community Foundation, which I remember it was like, we had one phone call with the guy, he's like, I'm gonna talk to somebody else, she called like a week later and she's like, we're gonna cut you a check, it'll be there in 2 weeks.
Right.
You know, and so it's like, wow, those guys, like, they turn some money around really quick, but there are not that many of them, so there have been, you know, there's probably a 6 to 8 other organizations that we've reached out to in the course of this to say, hey, do you have any small pots of money that you would, I mean, as anybody who's done a lot of grant raising, you gotta ask, you know, you gotta kiss a lot of frogs to like, you know, find something that comes up.
But what I would say is if you have your priorities set and you know what it is you need to raise and for what, then I will call Pat Moulton. Pat is like the best person at the state who knows everybody, has had a long career there, and knows where all the money is. And so I will sit with Pat and say, okay, here's what we need, can you help? And she will tap us in. If there's money to be had, she'll know. You know, at local money, I don't know, you know, I'm only here 3.5 years, so this is not my backyard. So I would rely on some people who maybe know more about that. But, you know, we'll do what we can do, we'll find what we can find, but I think the strength of this project is if you have money that's generated because you're selling lots, and that's part of your budget, right? So it's got an element of, it's not all grant money, it's not, you know, it's not all private money, it's like, it's this combination, and it's meeting affordable housing, and it's generating more housing than we need replaced perhaps, and you know, so it's got a lot of really important goals that it meets. I think that makes it really attractive to funders.
So tell them to give us the money already.
Can I ask a question about that? Totally naive here. Can you get grant funding to replenish funds on an expense that you already incurred? You know, could you get going while you're waiting if you know that everything's accounted for one way or the other?
Well, that depends on the funder. So like right now, FEMA is 100%, like FEMA emergency repairs, we're just coming through this cycle. It's all reimbursement. We had to put out, I don't even want to tell you how much money we spent to do all of the emergency repairs on the roads and the bridges and the rest. But federal highway and FEMA and all the federal grants of that ilk are reimbursement until you get into permanent projects, and then there's some other mechanism, but you have to spend the money first. So, but smaller grants and private grants, it's not usual that you have to do that. It's really like, here's the money, go do the thing you told us you were going to do, then report back and tell us you did it, show us, you know, how you used the money.
Right.
They're different.
One thing also to say on that, because this has come up with the CDBG funds, is that you have on a lot of federal funds that are shovel in the ground projects, you have to do something called NEPA review, which is National Environmental Protection Act. And if you have to, so with these grant fund, the ones that we just applied for the planning, we have, even though it's a planning grant, there's no shovel going in the ground, we have to send them our NEPA review forms, which basically says, here's where the project is, and it's exempt because there's not a shovel going in the ground. They still have to process paperwork on that before we can spend $1 on a reimbursement basis. So, which sometimes the NEPA review is quick, and it may be that the project is reviewed, it passes, you spend the money, and even if the grant is awarded later, you can go back to the NEPA review clearing. This is gonna come, the NEPA review is a big deal when you start putting shovels in the ground, because that area up there, I think the biggest one that might take time is that if we get an archaeology review that comes back that it's very likely they're gonna have to dig a bunch of test pits or something like that. That's we'll talk about this again later, but I would just wanna, it's something that's been a topic of conversation in the past. And that's one thing that it certainly wouldn't stop the project, but it definitely could slow it down, and if the project is not federally funded, we don't have to do that. And if the project is federally funded, we're gonna have to jump through all those hoops. And there's other things that people, about prevalent wages and buy local and buy American, all those things actually are not that hard to meet. But if you have a lot of NEPA review, that can really suck up a lot of time.
Right. That's why if you have private money for this project, that would be the easiest way to go.
Can you confirm the matching percentage just one more time, so?
Sure. Sorry, I made that confusing. CDBG,
Yeah,
10%.
okay,
CDBG DR, no match,
okay.
free money. Didn't get it. Northern Borders, 50%.
Perfect.
And
Thank you very much.
non-federal grant money match of 50%.
Yeah.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, none of them could have federal money used as a match.
CDBG DR can be the match.
Okay,
Can be the match to other federal. That one can, because that's special. But generally, FEMA, I can't use CDBG to offset FEMA. I can't. Federal highway, right? You can't. And they can't offset each other.
It also seems good just to say, if the town does get some significant disaster, CDBG DR funds, some disaster recovery funds. The town will need to weigh the use of those funds with other priorities, because, for example, if we have a $4 million bridge that we need to build with a 10% match, that's like $400,000. I mean, it's still it's a pretty big number. And these grant funds would, because they can match the other federal funds, they're sort of like an awesome use for that. So, beyond the scope of this committee, but something I think that we all should be cognizant of as a town about how we get, if we get $1 million or $5 million, we still have to have a priority ranking as a town about how to actually spend that money.
And that would be something the board, the select board would make ultimately that decision, which way the money goes. So the grants group would make recommendations. We would probably look at all the things that are on the table and figure out, what we're gonna need for what and make a recommendation, but it would be up to the board ultimately.
We ready to move on?
We're good?
Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Very welcome.
A letter of the committee to the congressional representatives potentially. Do you want to assign that to something?
We want to what?
Assign it.
that to something?
Sure.
Should we wait and see about the committees and then ask one of the committees to do it?
Sure.
That's not a bad idea. Does that
Yeah.
sound reasonable?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
And just, I think that it's helpful to me if this group starts to assign work to the work groups or committees too, and so that we're all know what we have to do.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's on the agenda today.
I think yeah,
Sorry, Donnie.
yeah, that's work groups is number 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So moving along, let's just talk about the group. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this. The group process, are we happy with this setup? Does this work? Is this better than what we did last time?
Yes.
I can see everybody.
Okay, we can
Yes.
see everybody.
And everybody feels like they can see the screen okay? Kirsty, yeah, I know it's a little. Okay, all right.
Okay. The minutes get posted once they're formally approved from the following meeting. Is that your job? Okay, I would think so of the secretary's job.
So it's, if you go, it's, it's Bob Fancher. And if you go on the Plainfield website and you hit there's like the contact webmaster at Plainfield or something at the bottom. If you email him to him, he'll put them up on our webpage. He did it to post the agenda for this meeting. So I understand everything goes through him to go.
And the agenda, it needs to be physically posted
That's my understanding as of today, but
Yeah.
maybe some other people have other clarity.
Only what I've read still really.
Okay.
Me, but, I believe it has to be posted at least 48 hours in 3 physical sites,
Yeah.
is my understanding.
And do we know what those typically are, if everybody else has to do it also? Like I know the town clerk's office, but what are the
I
other
think
two?
the post
Post
office.
Says in or near the municipal clerk's office and in at least 2 other designated public places in the municipality at least 24 hours before the meeting.
So.
So the post office and
Post office,
here, how
town
about-
clerk,
and here.
and like, is there a bulletin board here though? I don't think. Or you could put it up at the bulletin board at Positive High, would be another.
That would be better
probably-
because
okay.
nobody will come, I mean, not many people will be
Yeah,
coming
okay,
into
I
this
just, I
building.
mean, that's like, well, where do
Yeah.
people actually do it? I think
Used to
was
be
the
a
question.
store when we
Yeah.
had one in Plainfield.
Yeah,
Office.
Right.
okay, that's great, I think, you know,
So municipal clerk's office, post office,
yeah.
it says at least 24 hours before the meeting. In addition, notice shall be given either orally or in writing to each member of the public body at least 24 hours before the meeting, except that a member may waive notice of a special meeting.
Are we the public body or is this select board?
I don't know.
body?
I don't know. This is from Francis Rose,
Say-
sent it
Wait,
earlier.
Say it
I'm
again.
sorry, I missed that. Yeah.
Yeah, so Francis Rose sent this email to a number of people, including Arian. CC Carol Smith, Donnie, Dan Fingus, Carl, Peter Young Bear, Patty Gemelli, Bram Tobin, and me for some reason. I'm not sure why. I guess because I'm a chair or something. Okay. You want me to read it again? Should
Yeah, I
read it?
missed it. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
yeah, no, it's fine. It's complicated anyway. The time, place, and purpose of a special meeting subject to this section shall be publicly announced at least 24 hours before the meeting. Municipal public bodies shall post notices of special meetings in or near the municipal clerk's office and in at least 2 other designated public places in the municipality at least 24 hours before the meeting. In addition, notice shall be given either orally or in writing to each member of the public body at least 24 hours before the meeting.
That's all.
Yeah.
That's us.
Okay, except that a member may waive notice of a special meeting. And so this was from he says from this, or she says from this larger source law, I guess, video, and then there's a video on open meeting laws.
So this sounds like it's not our standard standing meeting. It's for any special meeting that we decide we need, like,
Oh, no, I
Yes.
think.
We're not having special meetings. If this is our stated regular meeting, that's not a special meeting.
But the only thing that we probably, because we've set a few meetings, I mean, I don't know all of this, but my impression was these first few meetings in some ways. We haven't set a standard meeting, probably at some point, I would think after these first few, we'll say like, oh, we're gonna meet on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays or whatever, something like that. And
Gotcha.
I think in the interim, we are sort of getting our feet underneath us and trying to figure out what normal is, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Carol was also noting that there are some people that don't have computers that specifically want to be mailed.
But I think, as I gathered, that's something that Carol just does.
Oh, she does it?
Yeah,
Okay. And she said Front Porch Forum and Facebook are fine, but
That
they
doesn't
don't
count.
count.
they don't
Yeah.
count. Yeah.
So does the agenda have to be posted only for special meetings or for all meetings?
I think all meetings. I
Even
think
though
all
that
me-
said special meetings, I would agree that it needs to
I
be
think it
all
needs to be all
meetings.
meeting, and maybe if we have a standard meeting, the timeframes are different in terms of like 4 hours enough, or does it, I know, I mean, so just on this topic of the open meeting law, I did, I found out that I can, cause for the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, I should actually be able to sign all of you up. I tested it and was able to sign him up, so you should, I would say sometime in the next couple of days, look for an email that will come from a VLCT mailbox talking about that training, which I think is next.
It's the 17th.
Is it the 17th?
No, I
Okay.
think it's the
16th.
16th.
It's coming up sometime in the
It's the
next week.
16th at 10 o'clock, I believe.
Yeah, next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday.
Yeah,
And
10
it's a-
to 11:30.
It's a Zoom thing, so there's no, I think it's infinite occupancy. It's not like it's gonna sell out or something like that. I mean, it's free, but yeah.
is it something that's, you have to be like, is it interactive? Like, cause there's no way I can do anything during the day
Yeah, I don't know the answer to
unless
that.
I have like couple weeks notice.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
There is a video on open meeting laws that.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think, and I
Francis
think it's
wrote.
not, my impression is it's not required, it's
Okay.
merely suggested.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I'd
so-
love to. I'll just
yeah.
keep my eye out. If,
Yeah,
I'll just look and if I can look at a future.
and let me also just like that, that link that whether either Francis Rose or Carol sent that says, here's a video on open meeting law. We can
Yeah.
circulate that as well, because not all times are gonna work for all
Yeah,
people.
that'd be great.
I
Thank
can
you.
send it to you right now.
Yeah, if that can
We
get
could
sent to the
circulate it.
whole,
Okay.
yeah, to the whole.
To the whole
committee.
group.
So
Thanks for doing that, Arian.
I'll
Yeah.
do it.
Do we know who's gonna post these minutes, where they have to get posted? We have to figure that out.
Well, that's Kirsty's gonna email Bob Fancher and he puts them on the website.
Okay.
And I think my understanding is that is sufficient,
That
that
is
there is no like other hard copy that has to go somewhere, but I could be wrong about
Oh.
that.
But
I'm sorry, I'm confused. You saying if it's posted on the website, we don't have to put it in the physical locations?
No.
So the agendas for these meetings, as I understand from Carol Smith, have to be posted physically. It's a hard copy, which, you know, we're learning new things every day.
Yeah,
And, but the minutes of our meeting can just be on the town
Okay.
website.
so who's
Does that
gonna
sound right,
post the agendas?
I'm happy, I did it this time, I think, you know, as we've been working to develop the agenda, I think it should be one of us, cause we'll be
Okay.
the first to have it together, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to keep doing that.
Okay,
And
that's
I'll
good. Just
figure
so
out
that-
how to,
That's great.
figure out how to get the hard copies out there,
Awesome.
or so, you know, between us, yeah.
yeah, and I
Okay.
would just like to throw out there, like, if you need other folks, you know, to support you in getting those up.
Mhm.
That'd be great, I think sometimes it might be a little bit, the three physical postings, this adds just another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
And
Yeah.
certainly.
And I'm
yeah.
right in the village, so I could cover that.
Yeah, and if once, I think it makes sense for the three of you to be, you know, one of you being the main person for that. But of course, once you have the agenda developed, being able to share it with us.
Yeah,
Then makes it easy for
Totally.
anyone else to support that.
So just
you.
parenthetically, we met on Friday after the meeting Thursday, and we will meet once a week. The three of us to develop the agenda and further along. So just so you know that that's going on. Okay, we did the open meetings training. Is there anything else about the group process that we need to talk about?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
We're most likely going to be, in the nearest future, looking at some specific numbers from potential engineers who are quoting on bids and stuff, and that's most likely something they would not want to be put out in the public with their name attached. So, in order to, you know, allow for this project to go forward, how are we going to call executive sessions if that comes up? Because that's a question that I have, that's top of mind for me in the future. Like if we're looking at specific numbers.
Rick may be the best to speak to that, having been through many municipal building processes in the past.
So, I think that, and you guys tamp me down if I go crazy on this, but I think the hope is that this group knows what the numbers are, we can look at them, we can all examine them. And that, if we're doing it in this group, it becomes public. I think there may be some aspects of it that we're just gonna have to take guesses at until it becomes a known fact.
Should we
Like,
anonymize the
what?
people that would be submitting these numbers, though, to protect their identity, like if it's a.
I don't think they care.
Right.
So I've been working along, we've been doing dual cost estimates. One, Sandy's been doing through an engineer,
Mhm.
and I've been doing it with a cost estimator who is somebody that I've used for a long time. And he's also a contractor. We're just comparing those two, still trying to make some sense out of it. And I think once we get that, you're going to have the opportunity to have your eyes glaze over as I have, while we try and get to some kind of a number that's like, okay, that's probably close enough for now.
Right.
And then we can move on.
I'm okay with.
I don't think there's any, tell me if you think there's any kind of confidentiality issues, and we'll have to cut them from the guesses that I've made, because there are things that, like land price, I don't know what those are. I've guessed at some of them, but that's not known to me. So,
I think that's a fair, I mean, I think that's a fair point. I do know that the select board is maintaining confidentiality around the land price until that is nailed down, so. I don't know I don't know the status of those current conversations. I don't think anybody does other than the select board, because that's all been handled in executive session. I've heard from the select board that they're trying to move that forward, but I don't know what that actually means. I do know they hired a lawyer who's supposed to be working on it. But I think that I mean, I think to the extent that, you know, you feel good about them, Rick, and the conversation has been, you know, when you guys feel like they're baked enough or whatever to have a conversation, I don't know if that, I mean, I defer to you about how, or anybody else about how confidential that needs to be. I don't think it needs to be that confidential, but I don't know.
you know, I think that there are several concerns. One that, something that should be done in the, privately, like land sales, should not become public. But then also there's this worry that because an estimator or estimators have looked at it, that it somehow biases the bid community. I'll tell you, it doesn't. They don't care what I've done today. They are not going to take anything that's been done by an engineer, an architect, the owner, or a cost estimator as anything
No.
of value, because between now and the time this actually gets bid, everything will change. And so it'll have no real bearing on that, if that's your concern.
Okay, great, that's all.
Yeah,
And there are specific laws about when we can go to executive session, and I'm sure they'll cover that in the open meeting
Yeah.
sessions next week.
Yeah, my understanding, because this did come up with the select board around the land purchase, was that if it's anything where the public information changes a negotiating position or basically puts a project potentially at risk. And you could imagine how a land purchase in particular is a good example of like, well, if you're negotiating with someone, you don't want to tell them what your biggest number is, right? Like that just seems a bad way to go into it. So, anyway, yeah.
So I think I'll probably leave it up to you and you three to decide whether we blank out the whole concept of land costs, or whether we as a group take a guess at what it is. And I don't care either way. We can fold it into the numbers or remove it. Doesn't, you know, it really doesn't matter all that much.
Okay. Question about public comments, designated time frame. I'm not sure I remember what we talked about public comments.
I think the conversation was, sometimes there is, it can be a good process tool to open a meeting with public comments generally, and then if there's specific items to discuss, that they're more a discussion between our group rather than just taking comments as they come in. It may be something that we're just cognizant of, and I don't know if we need to necessarily take a position at this time.
I see, public comments before the meeting starts.
Yeah, well, because I know that this, I've seen this in the select board has where they, on some issues, particularly when, I'm sure we've all seen this, there's a topic that could kind of go on forever. If you limit the discussion in a certain way, it keeps things a little more productive. Yeah.
So 5 minutes at the beginning for public comment, something like that as a regular agenda item.
I mean, I think, yeah, and I think we may have to play around a little bit with these rules, but we do, as I understand from Dan Fingus, have the right to say, hey, we're gonna discuss this item as a committee and we're gonna ask to hold public comment. Just to make sure things are moving. That's my understanding.
I wonder if we're going to do something similar to what you just proposed, if we put it on the back end of the meeting and then they can hear at least what we moved through and talked about. So, because some of their questions or comments might be addressed in our conversation and addressing the agenda items. So I would be inclined to put that on the end of the meeting if we were going to do that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, putting it at the tail end so that, you know, like you said, people can listen to everything that we're working through to date and see if their questions are answered. I also think, specific, like if there are certain, you know, agenda items, obviously that we want to engage and have public comment specifically on it, just building that into the agenda and saying like,
Mhm.
you know, time 20 minutes for public comment on this specific agenda item.
And I know one of, Mark Mahali, our representative for this area, because I asked him about this, and his strong suggestion from being in the legislature was in those kind of situations on a very specific topic, declare the amount of time that you have, ask how many people want to talk, and divide that time by the number of people and stick to it. And he said, we never passed a single law if we didn't like really keep people in the lane.
Sounds like sound advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a way to also accept public comment about if we're trying to get input, like have them submit like a written comment versus an oral comment that takes up space?
Betsy Ziegler sent me one today. I will forward it to all of you. She had a critique of this entire project. I will forward it.
Yeah,
Seems reasonable,
So-
right?
And just a suggestion, I think we have a communication group that will need to organize itself, and maybe they can triage some of that for the group so that, you know, so that it makes more sense to us all.
And maybe also we can always just, all of us keep our eyeballs and ears open.
Yeah, I would also argue that, again, as we develop the work groups, maybe the communications group can consider this and whether it makes sense, but having some sort of avenue for folks to share comments digitally, I think makes sense. Whether that's just like, you know, a standing Google form that is posted on our webpage on the town website or something that people can share, and then that way we all are able to see those and bring them into the discussion and fold.
That's a good idea.
Okay, we ready to go? Missing meetings. I can start. I mean, it's impossible that we're all gonna make every single meeting. I'll start with true confessions. I'm gonna be away, leaving in 10 days for a week in California to visit my brother, which was on my schedule for months and months and months before this came along. And I don't think, for instance, that I'm gonna be in a place where I can join the meeting by Zoom. I think the timing is just, if I can, I will, but I think I'm gonna be in the car driving somewhere if we have our meeting, on 2 weeks from today, on that Thursday. I hope that, I really think that when people can't make it, they're gonna Zoom in, no doubt. I am a firm believer in personal relations. I think it makes a difference, that whenever we can, if we can make an effort to show up in person, I think that's better. Anybody else want to have true confessions and tell us when you're not gonna be here?
I have 2 little ones at home and I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
I have 2.5 hours of sleep when I'm adult.
Oh,
But, I agree, in person is important. If I'm at home right now, I'm just gonna be with a screaming baby. I won't be able to be here. Really, so.
Yeah, and I mean, I think my take on it is, I see attending via Zoom and in person, both of those as still like making the meeting. Obviously, I agree that in person is more ideal for getting work done effectively, but I don't think that, like, for example, zooming into the meeting counts as missing a meeting.
No, it doesn't.
And yeah, I think it's kind of hard to like throw out a number of being like, okay, after someone misses X number of meetings, we have to like have a conversation or do something, but
I hate having to put like that kind of constraint on things, because
Yeah.
it just makes me twitch a little bit, but I also see the need sometimes to like have a standard, just so that if something becomes a problem, you can look to, well, this is what we agreed on.
yeah.
I don't know if like 3 consecutive meetings missed calls for a conversation.
Let's cross that bridge if we get to it. How about that?
I mean,
You know, let's
I
not
don't-
anticipate that.
But I disagree with that approach only because if it becomes a problem and then all of a sudden you're making me the problem now because
Mhm.
you have some issue with my attendance. Instead of having a standard that has nothing to do, or doesn't feel like it has anything to do with me.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I think that, like, that's.
No.
I think that that's exactly what I was trying to get at, as well as I think being able, hopefully, we're all, committed and are able to be here as frequently as possible. But having something that's a standard that everyone knows, okay, this is the expectation. If I'm missing 3 meetings in a row, there is going to have to be a conversation. Hopefully, it doesn't ever come to that of someone missing 3 meetings in a row. We also could say, like, missing 3 meetings in a row without providing. Without providing
Exactly.
notice.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's, because if your trip was extended, say.
Yep.
And you were gone a month,
Yep.
and there's just no, then that's totally different. But I agree with that.
Then I should
caveat.
resign.
Yeah.
So I
What?
don't know if this would be something, if other people had comments, but I'm happy to like put forth a suggestion.
Vicky.
I just have one
Okay.
comment, that's a confession, but I'll put it out there. But I have previously made some travel plans that will take me out of the country. So all I'm gonna say is, when I can Zoom, I'm going to Zoom if I can't be present, but there are times future that I'm not gonna have access.
Yeah.
Just FYI, so you might see that.
And I'm not gonna plan my life around committee meetings either. I mean, it can't be expected. You're gonna miss some meetings.
Yeah,
Yep.
Jared, did you want to play with a policy around this that?
Yeah,
look at?
sure. Should it be something that I write up and share to the group, or just kind of verbally express the policy?
I think writing it up is the best.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have a
great.
little summary though that you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I think the summary would just be, that the expectation is for committee members to attend either in person or via Zoom. And provide advance notice if you're unable to do so. 3 consecutive missed meetings without prior warning to the committee, calls for a conversation amongst the committee about your ability to continue on the committee and, yeah,
Meet the responsibilities.
meet the obligations expected
Yeah.
of committee members.
Can I add, and I think that sounds excellent. I would add one amendment that it just is the expectation if you miss a meeting or a number of meetings is that you did the homework. And so that you're read the minutes and show up and and are on the same, hopefully close to the same page.
And let us know ahead of
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And let us know, within a reasonable amount of time that you're not gonna be there for whatever reason. so
Which
that
is
we-
what, like 24 hours or 48 hours?
I at least 24 hours. As soon as you can let us know, let us
Yeah.
know.
I mean, but if somebody wakes up in the morning and
Yeah.
feels fine, and then by noon
Yeah.
they're sick, then
Right.
they're not
Life
coming in, they're
happens.
not on Zoom.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think having a little caveat for, extenuating circumstances.
Yeah.
Of course.
Makes
Yeah.
sense.
We're all grown-ups, we're all professionals, I think we can handle it, but it is nice to have something to fall back on in case.
Beg your pardon, I'm not a professional anymore.
Or
So-
I'll add my confession quickly. I will rely on Zoom to connect to a lot of the meetings, but I will be as involved and present as possible. And I volunteer to get the video recordings up as soon as possible. The turnaround time on that totally depends on internet speed, but that's another way that we can connect people who, were sick or whatever.
Thanks, Kim. So we need liaisons to the select board. Francis Rose says that it doesn't have to be the same people every time, but it could be. How do we want to work it?
I would volunteer to be one of the liaisons, and as far as, I think there was a suggestion that there's at least 2. I think that's smart.
Yep.
At least 2.
Yeah, and I don't know is that a once a month? I just know it's supposed to be when like the town clerk and the town treasurer do a report, which is not every meeting.
I think, I believe Francis Rose shared, an email that said that it's the two, like the second and fourth Mondays are when.
Both times there's a
Yes.
report
I
out.
think that's when there's the standing report
Okay.
from the town clerk and grants.
So we need another volunteer. We got one.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I just don't know if I'm gonna be around enough on Mondays. I preserve Thursdays, but I'm not sure.
I mean, I'd be happy to, yeah, to do that when possible, and Liz, you and I could communicate on the side to try to make sure that at least one of us will do it.
Okay.
So let's just say if, since both of you are gonna volunteer that, you know, if a month down the road, you wanna change, we can do that too.
Okay,
We can say, you know, we can say,
I appreciate that.
yeah, you can say, hey, whatever reason, I don't wanna talk to those people anymore.
Well, and I also imagine, you know, I know the select board, when they were forming this committee said to absolutely like rely on community members that want to be involved and, you know, engage, with the larger Plainfield community in that way. So this could be another instance of if there are people that are showing up regularly, from the public that want to be in that position, then that could also be a role for them.
And, okay, so finally on this topic, I think it's going fine without people raising hands.
Mhm.
But what I'd like to, so I'd like to keep it going that way. I think that the free-flowing discussion works. If I see things starting to get stacked up, I'll try and intercede. The other things I like to say is if you are trying to get a word in edgewise and you can't, signal me, or if you just raise your hand, we'll all know that you're trying to get a word in edgewise and the rest of us are hogging the speech. So when we see somebody raise our hand, the rest of us can settle down and let that person get the word in. And I think we're better off with this free-flowing conversation and not having to recognize and raise hands.
I agree.
Does that work?
Yeah, I think-
More creative process.
Mhm.
Well, it's easier this week because we could see each other. I think
Yes.
there were
Yeah.
times last week when people couldn't see each other, so they didn't know that somebody was trying to speak.
I will just add to that, I think if folks can be on a swivel and, you know, like I'm facing Arian and Lauren and Donnie. So making sure that if you're seeing that Kirsty is really trying to say something, like I can't see the two of them behind me if I'm trying to talk to the majority
Right.
of y'all. So you guys being able to say, hey, there's someone that's
Okay.
desperately trying to
Right.
talk.
And let's have anybody do that.
Yes.
Say,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
so-and-so's
absolutely.
trying to get a word in.
Yeah.
Doesn't always have to be me. It could be anybody here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could intercede for each other. And I think we're doing fine on that score. So, okay, moving right along. Overview of the background info folder project website. Arian, that's you.
Great. I think there was I wanted to just dig into this issue. It came up, or this item, we talked about having a folder with specific information. If it's not too tedious, I thought maybe overviewing what's on the project website might be a good place to start, because pretty much all the documents or a lot of background information for this project has been put on the website. At first I was like, do we need to reinvent the wheel with a folder when all of this is kind of mostly up there? Not to say that it's, you know, easy to navigate or live otherwise, but we can just go through a couple of sections high level. And if there are things that seem like, hey, what about this and what about that? And maybe that didn't make it on there. I would love the input of that about how to maybe either put it on the website or share it through a folder, but I didn't want to start a whole new folder
Yeah.
since so much of the information is already there. I hope that that was an action item that I had from the last meeting, but then thinking about it was like, yeah.
I just want to say that because I think I brought up the, having a folder that for our group, but it was more about like a workspace that is, accessible to, like like a Microsoft, OneDrive, something like that.
We
where
can, we can definitely set up a Google folder and have things. I mean, I could see things like if we do this draft letter to our congressional delegation that lives
You
in there, I
can
mean, that
edit.
makes a lot of sense. I think just,
Yeah.
I wanted some more input from this group about what's, rather than just sort of hauling off and putting all the same documents
Yeah.
back up online. I think that kind of input is the input I'm looking for.
Yeah, for me, like, that's, it's more about going forward, and then if there is some specific historical document that we need from the steering committee, that you could just drop it in there.
Okay, so I definitely can set up a Google Drive folder if there's, and invite everybody to be an editor on that. That seems easy, even if it's for the time being empty, but other things will go in there in the future.
And then the groups, the working groups can have
Can
their.
use that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can have subfolders, and I mean, it's, everybody can start a new folder for a specific thing.
Yeah, and I think that, like you were saying, Liz, the benefit of doing that is certainly being able, the work groups themselves being able to collaborate, and also if we plan for all of the, overall committee work to happen in, say, a Google Drive that's shared with all of us, then anytime we actually want input beyond the work group, it's very easily accessible.
Did everybody get the minutes and the agenda and all the documents that I
Yeah.
sent?
Yes, thank
No,
you. So
Vicky had trouble because she didn't have a Gmail account, but everybody else received those?
I had issues, but I was trying to do it on my phone. I haven't tried it on my computer yet, and that might be the issue.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, the ability to-
sharing a Google Doc.
My work Google, and my home Google decided to like,
Not cooperate.
oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I find it's like, oh, you got 3 different logins because they're for different projects, and there's logged in the wrong one. That's what happens to me. I can't find it.
Find all my personal stuff on my work. And I'm like, no, that's not good.
I know.
I mean, nothing's bad, but
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
good.
No, it's too complicated. I'm gonna have this. Let's see this up in a minute, because I know about this, most of this stuff. Be right back.
Sorry. I'm gonna see if I can share the. You know how you turn sharing on? I forget. Just so that people online.
Click on share.
Yeah, that big green thing.
Yeah, I get this.
Oh. You're not a host.
I thought I was the host. I guess not.
Expansion.
Then you might need to go into this settings, like if you go more.
It's maybe not the host.
I don't think anybody's the host.
Is Bram the host?
It maybe is a different login. I thought this was the select board computer, so I thought it would just work.
What are you trying to share?
I was just gonna share the project website so that people could see it on Zoom and just do like a kind of high level overview of the different sections. And there's a few things that I think are helpful. The only thing I can say is we can do this as a group, and I apologize to everybody in Zoom land, but I'll try to explain, or do you have another idea?
Click on who the participant are, it should say if someone is listed as the host.
Oh, you actually can click claim host.
Claim
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, just kidding.
Let me,
Yeah, try and sign in.
oh, yeah, okay, I mean that. Boom,
You are
all right. All right. So the credentials were saved in here, thank goodness. All right,
There it is.
perfect. All right, we figured it out. So. And then I just like not have it not placed by. So this is the expansion website. I'm sure everybody's seen it. There hasn't been a lot, they haven't actually updated the round 2 survey and data, which that's reminding me that I should do that. I would really encourage folks to read the summary results of the first round survey, because I think it is really interesting to see what the comments were. And the first round survey was, we had the 3 drawings distilled down to 1 drawing. And I found that data really rich about what people liked and didn't like across the drawings. And particularly that there was like over 50% really liked C, and that became the basis. And then it was sort of about 25 and 25% on the other 2 drawings. So that was just, obviously there's going to be differences of opinion, but it's nice to see when there's sort of at least a plurality within one of those particular areas. I think some of the other things that are very interesting to look at here are worth at least looking, in the planning documents.
Arian, if you're sharing, I'm not seeing it.
Oh, it's not,
Oh, it's such a screen
it says
share.
that is anybody else, are
I'm
others in
seeing it.
Zoom?
I'm seeing it just fine.
Okay,
Not sure why.
So there was a public input survey that was done last September and October. It's interesting to see some of those responses as well. Some of the maps that we showed last week are there, whether that's interesting or not, in the zoning regulations. Other permitting, abilities to serve letter, there actually are a couple other of these that need to get put up as well, but this is sort of going through the criteria that is the basis for Act 250, even though I believe that this project is going to be Act 250 exempt and we'll get there. Putting all those letters together to show that we've contacted all the agencies, the relevant agencies, and that they were like, yeah, we don't see an issue serving. And Sandy, I think, has a couple, oops, what did I just do? So that is just a sort of, there is an overview on the financing. I would say, given the fact that we're going through a total recosting, that information is a little dated, but it's, you know, good, but it's a nice reference.
You have edit access on this page, right?
Yes, so this is just a Google site that we set up, and there's a couple of, I think it's me and Kim and maybe Lauren has access to.
Can you put on some of these pages, like, this is historic information?
That's a good
Or
idea.
like maybe a banner on the top or something, and it's now it's part of a town committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a good point. That should
That-
go, and yeah,
At the
and
beginning,
that should go right at the beginning on the front page.
you know,
Yeah.
that the last meeting of the ad hoc
Or even
committee
like a
was
top
such.
banner that can go on all the pages that you can edit. I think Google Sites will
Yep.
do that.
Yeah.
Yep, that
And then-
is, that's a good point. And then
Thanks.
I think there's still, the town website does
And
still
then-
reference this site, so it's probably good that everything is sort of in harmony, and that's good feedback right now.
Yeah,
Are there, you know, there's some calendar sort of items about different things that happen, but I think everybody sort of knows all of that. And are there other things that, excuse me, would be good to have as background information just in the folder, or, and maybe that will emerge, we can add
I think it's
the
gonna emerge
documents.
as we dig in.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, there are some, I've kept an archive of, in printed format, a lot of the press coverage. I mean, I've tried to keep up with that, just getting a Times Argus and, you know.
Yeah.
But, there are also some articles that I've sent around or seen on other village projects in other towns, which are super interesting as background. You know, there's a major project going on in Middlebury right now that, what's the
Downstream?
manufactured homes in East Montpelier?
Oh, and yeah,
No,
Kimberly Peg?
Huntington?
Huntington.
Oh, Huntington.
Yeah, that Huntington Homes is doing, they're being contracted to do 150, I think, houses over there. That's happening right now, and that was in conjunction with the town of Middlebury. And I just read and circulated to a couple people an article in Vermont Business Magazine about a major project in Springfield, Vermont that's happening. That is super interesting, and I did note that the interest rate for their loan was 7.5%.
Yeah, I did too.
So anyway, it might be good, you know, if I find these articles, if we post them, just.
Yeah, especially if we have like a folder where we can keep a lot of that research work. Like
Yeah.
When we come across this stuff that might be interesting for us all to peruse, that'd be great. And then any raw video media files, you know, that we can throw into a folder, because likely there's gonna be some kind of, if this happens and we do this right, there'll be some stuff that comes out of it, and it'd be good to
Archive that.
it'd be
Save
good to
it.
archive that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the only other, the other item I just wanted to mention was the budget to date. And so to date, we have, I'll just sort of talk through it. To date, we received both $35,000 grant from the Vermont Community Foundation, which I think many people have heard of. We received $5,000 in an anonymous donation, and then there's several from a local person who just said, you know, put this to good use for the project. And then there are some other expenses that have been picked up by myself, Lauren, and Sandy Bitsum, you know, just out of like a philanthropic donation towards the project. Which puts the project budget to money to date of, you know, somewhere between $40,000 and $45,000. The majority of that went to a $30,000 engineering contract with Engineering Ventures, and that did all of the phase 1 engineering drawing set to date, in addition to some preliminary permitting meetings. We spent other money on some survey drawing and work done by both Rick Bell and Chase and Chase. We did a fair amount of wetland delineation work, which is a guy named Brad Wheeler. And we did soil testing with like test pits. And so there was a soils engineer who came out and collected samples, and they do a number of laboratory tests to provide the engineer so that the engineer can sort of better design the site. And to do that, we also had some excavation work. Carlo, who owns P-Buy, has a smaller excavator and came out and dug the pits and then refilled them. So that, in addition, there were some other miscellaneous expenses associated with, and we did get a little money from the Vermont Council on Rural Development as well. They additionally donated their time. They donated $1,000 towards various supplies for the community design workshop in February, and so that was very generous of them in addition to their time. There have been a whole host of other people who've done a lot of pro bono. Sandy has put in countless hours. And even paid her draftsperson out of pocket to do a lot of work. And so that was a significant donation on her part that was actually a cash donation. So that is kind of the overview of things that we've spent money on to date, and the approximate, you know, we're looking, I guess, if we count that other stuff, probably around $45,000 that we've gone into this.
You said you're working with somebody who's doing
Yeah, there's some pending expenses that we Rick has encumbered that have not been paid for yet, and you know, it's one thing that we'll have to figure out how to pay for, and that was, I guess, we're about $2,000 in the costing.
I think so, from what I got from my cost estimator. I haven't seen any bill yet, and at some point I need to figure out how we want to do billings for him. But you know, I think that's probably a good number per cost estimate. Around 2,000, 3,000 somewhere in there.
And so is this, yeah, is this a question that we need to bring up with the select board? Like, here's the budget, the money that's available, and
I think we probably want to, I mean, I don't think we need to figure that out quite at this meeting. There are some things that are a little bit pending, and I think part of that is like the transition process of committees. And I still feel like we're getting our feet underneath us in terms of like, you know, I think we want to make sure we have a strong base and everybody feels comfortable before we get into like super decision-making mode or troubleshooting. I also think that like most of the people we're working with have faith that they're, you know, they've gotten paid so far and we'll figure it out. You know, and there are some things where we just kind of had to move forward, like the cost estimator, it's like, we just need this, and so you have to figure it out. The plan on some of these has been to pay them out of the $150,000 loan from the Vermont Community Foundation. However, the select board has only taken preliminary action on that. My understanding is that there's been a draft document that has been sent back to the select board for, you know, for that loan, and you know, probably will be some more back and forth on that. Yeah, there's also a pending traffic study that is another $2,000 that has been commissioned. So those are the current obligations, essentially, that, you know, that our group, I don't know what you say, we've sort of inherited, but there are just certain things that sort of have been in process for a while.
do you have a list of those, like the line item?
I don't have it all in one place, but I mean, I can type something up that summarizes what I just said. It has been in various people's heads, including mine and Sandy's, and
That would be helpful.
yeah.
if they wanted to store it on a spreadsheet even. and
Yep,
then we
sure, that's fine, like a sort of, like a sources and uses kind of type thing.
Yeah.
Is this a
Aaron,
good?
you up? Sorry, go ahead.
Is this a good time to, one, thank Lauren for her work in tracking, compiling as much pro bono and volunteer donations time as she can. And there, to know if the time, I know the volunteer hours can count, like count for
Right.
something, can be a really good thing. Are we accruing volunteer hours right now? Like, does this time that we are attending meetings, are gonna be in our work groups, does that count? Should we track it? And I will admit, I'm not a shining example of doing that homework.
There is a spreadsheet that the grants group has been circulating that is a state spreadsheet that basically, it actually says everybody's time is, unless you're a professional expert with some other credentials, is it's like $33 an hour. So there is something that it
There's a
may be,
value.
there is a value. There's a value if we need more match for the town, which
Right.
I think at this point, even some of these hours may be eligible for certain FEMA matches as well. So I'm happy to send around the grants group spreadsheet.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I did make a spreadsheet of all the people who had contributed in kind, which I can also get to Arian to post on the website or whatever.
Yeah,
If you
that
wanted
sounds
to.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Sandy estimated that she had put in 1,500 hours so far. And there was a list of probably about, I would say 10 or 12 other providers who, I mean, we had all the facilitators at the design workshop. They all donated their time. We had something like 11 architects and designers who donated their time. So there's been a significant number of people who have donated considerable time, so
Yeah,
important to keep a track of.
yeah,
Arian, you gonna go through the sequencing?
yeah.
Is that
and
next?
Can we
Are
change
we
to the
there?
next topic? So, we're not gonna sort of map this all out tonight, but I think it's good to start thinking about what essentially our deliverables are and how we get there as a group, so that we can really map our path forward. The select board and their document has deliverables. Don't have that document.
I think I have it. Hold on one second. Pretty sure I have it. It was the select board's description, I believe, of the advisory committee in that document. You're looking for what, the scope of work or the,
Yeah, the scope, well,
I have them right here on the website.
what was it?
I thought there was someone that was more of like a deliverable.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
I think
Where
I have
is
them
it?
right here.
Okay,
You want me to read them out?
Here,
yeah,
it is.
okay.
Item.
Term limit time commitments. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have it.
Okay.
Isn't that
Oh,
it?
wait, no, so you wanna read it? I can-
Yeah, so there's 10 deliverables. One, rehouse those affected by the floods in 2023 and 2024. Provide additional affordable housing amidst.
I think these are more of like the goals. and
Yeah,
I-
those are
and
the
I would say
goals.
The deliverables, I'm sorry, are more like a plan for X and a plan for Y.
Yeah, if we can do it, or if we can't do it, and whether we're suggesting for them to.
Yeah,
go
it's
to
pretty
a-
much this, scope of work.
Uh,
No?
no, I thought there was one that was in here. Oh yeah, it is down here on the term limited time commitment, so.
Yeah,
So the select board's opinion, that either we go until either the select board deems the project is infeasible, or the following have all been accomplished. Successful financing achieved, such as a project bond vote successfully passing, or a grant or other funding is obtained. I would say probably and or, because
Mhm.
we need all options on the table. Completion of the permitting and permitting process, which I think it's important to add engineering to that. It's not specified here, but it seems like we're never gonna get through permitting if we don't get through engineering. Delivery of a land sales plan to the select board and delivery of a project execution plan to the select board. I think those four things seem, I think that's a good capturing of that. Is there anything else that we need other than these minor amendments about engineering and that it's grants and or revenue?
I don't see them.
That doesn't mean we can't, this is not a speak now or forever hold your peace moment, like we may discover some other thing that we have to develop along the
So
way,
these
but.
are obviously just high level, like, points of things, and there's gonna be a
Yeah, I think in terms,
laundry list of
but,
things below that.
I think so, but I also think in terms of, I mean, I could see every single one of these essentially being like a written document that says, this is how this works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
in the end.
In the
yes,
end.
Yeah,
yes, yes.
And so I'm just trying to say, what's the flagpole post that we're marching
Gotcha.
towards? So
Yep.
that we know, so that we can come up with a plan of how to get there.
Yeah, I think using those 4 or 5, however many.
I think
it
there's
was,
4 of them.
Yeah, four,
As,
following
as
items.
the thing we're working towards, and of course, knowing that there's going to be, all of the other documents and work of these different groups that's necessarily going to take us to that
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
So sort of acknowledging that that's where we're supposed to head. Talking about the sequencing of how to possibly get there. And wanted to just talk that through as a group. I think, so I'm just gonna sort of say how I'm conceiving about this, and I really hoping that either everybody says, yeah, that sounds good, or that it's like, hey, we need to refine how this is. And it's likely there will be revisions along the way because, you don't know what you don't know, right? So the plan and the budget, and by the plan, I mean, there's a layout that has been talked about and extensive, there's been quite a bit of feedback in public workshops and interest. The plan and the budget, obviously, the plan is going to need to conform with the practical realities of how to pay for it. And I think that our job as a group is to make sure that, ends meet,
Yeah.
essentially. And, not, that doesn't, so, and I think that is probably gonna be a little bit of an iterative process, because the costing, as I understand it right now, correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, has been based on what the most current drawing is. And so there are probably some things where we will look at and say, well, if we change the plan like this, that we might not know the exact number that would change the budget, but we have, that initial costing is gonna help us figure that out. And so, for example, if we said, the current plan has, I think, 40 lots in it, 39 or something like that. If we as a group say, well, we need to figure out how to get more revenue out of this, there are 2 options. One of them is we charge more for lots, or we figure out how to put more lots on there. And that's sort of our business plan, where we say, here's the costs, and here's the things that the changes, here's the levers of control that we have about the changes that we can make to make this work. And I think getting that to a point where we all feel good about it, that this is actually, these are lining up, these ends are meeting, is probably going to be somewhat of an iterative process that I think, we're going to start to dive into once we have this costing that I hope we have soon, or this month. After that, if we have that worked out, it seems like only then, I know there's been this is on my own opinion. I know we have an RFP that's put out about engineering. I know that we are getting some responses back on that. I personally think that we may want to slow that down just a little bit as we are trying to get our legs underneath us, because while we do need engineering help to maybe look at certain options and decisions in terms of engineering a plan, we need to have that plan definitive in the budget first.
Yep.
Yeah.
To
So,
that end, Arian, I think one thing that was recently discussed with Paul Bober, the engineer for the phase 1 portion of it, was potentially extending on some sort of hourly basis his role as we need him. And so that we can continue to leverage what he knows about it if we want to make some changes and extrapolate costs.
I think that seems reasonable, and something that we should, at some point, probably not today, but, have that on the table as a way of continuing that service. I know we probably need a little bit of input from the select board about what is our budget and what can we do on some of these things to move this forward. So, but certainly, I think that's a good proposal, because he's already up to speed. And not that we have to necessarily use them for phase 2, but for right now, if we have, 1 to 2 hours of somebody's time, he doesn't have to spend the first hour getting up to speed.
Just to clarify, so this would be for the engineering work instead of hiring somebody totally different? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I think, I think the way this is set up is that there's a phase 1 and phase 2 engineering, and the phase 1 is over at this point,
Right,
or very close to being over. And the phase 2 would actually take it to completion, but, I'm not sure how valuable that is because we're sort of changing course potentially. I think it's pretty likely. I mean, we've got a new group, but we also have a lot of other factors that are coming to bear. So, the idea was to hire a second group and redo that competitively, redo it as a competitive process for, the phase 2. The timing on that seems a little funny right now because we're in a state of determining scope. And you all, I've just begun to scratch the surface of some of the scope issues by trying to make sense of some of the costing, but you all have not had a chance to do that. And so until you have and you feel comfortable with it, I don't really feel like we should do anything more than ask questions, have them help us extrapolate, if we make this change, how would we do it? And potentially how would it cost? People like to know that answer to that one.
that makes 100% sense to me, but I just wonder if we are obligated to do a competitive bid process because we're not, okay.
No, but I think I think it's in the town's best interest at some point, because their scope is over, to do a competitive bid process from here forward.
For
Once
the
you actually
phase
start
2.
Phase 2.
Not
So we're
just,
gonna consider the questions we come up with at this point as part of phase 1?
I think they really are.
Yeah, okay,
I mean, they
I
really are.
I
Phase
gotcha.
1, we're extending phase 1 because we have questions of clarity about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it makes the most sense to me, but.
And then once we have an actual plan, that would indicate we're moving into phase 2.
Yeah,
and then
so I
we
don't-
might
I don't
have
think
to-
I understand it, yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up.
So am I. So,
Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense to me.
and I think, there's nothing that's necessarily wrong with the RFP that went out, but it is sort of like. I think it's safe to say there may be some changes to the drawing, so telling somebody to run with that feels like,
Yeah.
I don't know if we're ready for that.
Right.
Yeah,
We ready to move on?
yeah, sorry, so
I'm
just.
sorry, no, go ahead.
Well,
I'm
so
trying to fix you.
engineering permitting, if we get through that and we have a good plan, that's, I think, is the time that we go for the bond vote. Because we have essentially, we are, even though it's possible, we need to have a lot sales plan and a construction management plan ahead of the bond vote. I guess the way that maybe that is the right order.
Yeah, I think people are gonna wanna know what the total costs are, so.
For sure.
Of
As
course.
detailed as we can be.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also like just, that how to sell the lots and how the construction is gonna be managed, so that those plans are, I mean, I could see that these are short written documents of like. This is gonna be managed like in this way. Here's the proposal for how, not that I know what those are, but that there is a document that answers that question.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think in my mind, the way that you have it laid out here, makes sense in terms of having, like, really, if you think about each line as that's when you're getting into the real nitty gritty of, okay, like, what is the actual mechanism for selling lots and what is the priorities or whatnot. But I think having at least a summary of what our idea for that is when we go for a bond vote, so that people can kind of take it in its entirety and reflect on that and vote on that.
So I just made a note to move those two up before the bond vote from a sequencing standpoint.
Yeah.
Conceptually, as we
Think that
think
makes
about our
sense.
scope of work.
Yeah,
It's kind of what I was saying, maybe lacking clarity last time, is that we're gonna have to create a context for these numbers that makes sense to individual voters, because the cost estimate number, they always seem big. They make no sense to anybody outside of the construction industry. And even then, it doesn't really relate to you
Yeah.
personally. So getting it right down to how is it gonna be paid for, and what are those risks gonna be to the community is the hard work that we're gonna have to do, and that does mean going all the way through. the
I agree.
steps.
So that, I mean, that's kind of that, not, I mean, are there other items that seem like they, at this sort of higher level that seem, like they need to be,
Yeah, I have a question, sort of. I feel like there's two sections to all of this. There is it feasible? And what do we consider not feasible? We haven't asked that. We haven't defined what isn't feasible at this point. Maybe those who have been on the committee can sort of say what they've been thinking about what is feasible and not feasible. What's their definition? And then once we determine that on a high level it's feasible, or there's a backup, okay, we have 10 lots and they're really expensive, but we have 10 lots. People buy them and it's playing field. What's feasible and what's not feasible? And then all the rest of the work, right? Like we have our own internal definitions of what we consider to be feasible.
I mean, I think that's a really, I appreciate that framing. I think that's a really interesting question. And I wonder, I mean, I think the definition, and I would encourage anybody else from the sort of original steering committee, was feasible was, can we come up with a way to pay for this and get it through permitting? As sort of being the definition of feasible. That may not be an adequate definition. I think it's an interesting question. If Donnie feels okay to talk about it for a second.
Sure.
Not that we have to come up with a definitive answer right now, but I think those were the primary criteria that the steering committee looked at.
So, in the message from the select board to us, wasn't one of the points that had to be cost neutral to the town? So I
Yeah.
think that's a key, one key.
So the weights of the lot sale prices would need to offset whatever funding we're taking out in a bond. Minus.
There are other goals as well to keep in mind, like
Yeah.
are we achieving the
Yeah,
goal.
we have other goals. Yeah.
It is fair point in terms of, yeah.
I didn't catch what Kim was trying to say.
I didn't either.
Well,
Kim?
there some, while I could not recite them off the top of my head, the project has certain goals that came from the very beginning. And so they might not be in the exact language that we would put them now, but one of them was to like revitalize the village. That's vague, but if we go back to that kind of list of what are we trying to achieve and make sure that whatever we're moving forward is in line with the heart of what we were going after. It seems like that's a
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Question.
can I just clarify one thing because it's relevant to this discussion? The purpose of the committee, there were 10 points that the
Mhm.
select board described in what they called their charter for this committee. And so it was with the goal of it being cost neutral to the town, but that was not actually one of the deliverables that they listed on the term
So you're
limited.
saying that sort of
and
like, this is
time
sort of needs
commitment.
to reference these other ones.
Right, but
Yeah.
what they said is successful financing is achieved, such as a project bond vote successfully passing or grant or other funding is
Yeah,
obtained.
I mean,
So, yeah.
So I guess my question is, do we deem it unfeasible if we can't meet all of these goals?
I think that's a great question.
Like if we see a cost estimate that's $10 million, just to throw out a number. And we're like, okay, we have 40 lots for sale and nobody in Plainfield that was affected by this flood is going to buy one of these lots. Is that now an unfeasible plan? We might still have 40 lots that sell in 5 minutes and the village is expanded and there's a larger tax base. And there's lots of benefit to the town if that one or two of those goals is not met. Like, do we have our Shangri-La goals? Or do we have some fallbacks that are like, okay, we're still meeting the overall majority of these goals, but.
Well, I think we have to develop this project a little bit further before we can answer that question. I think that we could come to a point where we collectively decide that the project is not feasible because we've gotten enough information that we determine that it doesn't meet the goals that we set out to achieve. But I think it's premature to make that, I think it's an important thing for us all to be thinking
Yeah.
about in terms of when, how we move forward, but it's like one of those charts where you get to one point and then you go this way or you go that way kind of thing.
I think in the plan we could have, as we get the work groups get going and we have an idea as a committee, we could have checkpoints at that where we go back to the select board and say, okay, here's what we know right now. This is the opportunity. These are the challenges, and get the feedback.
And I really like that because what I think works well, and we're partly trying to figure out where we're going, how we get there, and what's important. And so it seems like an impossible task, but if we just start doing like all of it at once, then it'll be messy, it'll be wrong. But we do it once and we circulate an idea through, and then we say, you know what? That doesn't seem to work as well, and this one doesn't, but here's a diamond in that rough. And we start pulling some of them out that do make sense, then we can develop those further. And the check-in can happen at any point, but I think we have to frame the context of it being, well, we know a little bit now.
Yeah.
We don't know a lot.
I agree.
Yeah,
My-
and we are not charged with making decisions. We're charged for research and presenting a plan that seems feasible,
Yeah.
seems to make sense.
Right.
And it may not make sense to the rest of the town, and they will decide that in the vote.
Yeah, I think
Folks.
our role,
Go ahead,
as advisory
Yes.
committee, I think is important to highlight there. Like,
Remember.
we as a group can determine what we think is a feasible project, whether that is it meeting all 10 things or meeting half of them or whatever, and provide that as a proposal to the select board saying this is our most feasible plan, and then interacting with that however they see.
Folks, I am loath to cut off discussion, especially when it's an important discussion like this. But I do want to point out that the next really important thing on our agenda
Yeah.
is forming the work groups.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, I do want to get that done before we leave today, because I think that's critical
Yeah.
to everything we're talking about. So the hour is getting later,
Yeah.
and we can go over time. But if we can finish on time, that's so much the better.
I did want to just point out, there were a couple little things that made it into that work group's budget item that were just sort of random notes that, and I take responsibility for, like, there was a note about the zoning revote. And so item number 2 is not a real work group. And I think there was a question about communications and what drives the schedule. But that, anyway, and the project management schedule. So I want to apologize. That was a little messier than I wanted it to be, and I was going a little fast and maybe some jumping around, so.
Could you speak to
Okay.
what the select board agreed to as far as if the special meeting was going to be held and when that was for the zoning laws? Do you know that?
It was announced on a date, and I want to say it was May 20.
Yeah, it's May 20th. The
No, I
vote-
think it's May 20th.
Oh, 20th.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was
May
in the
20th.
paper the other day,
Okay, thank you.
May 20th.
I haven't heard yet. Thank
Yep.
you.
Okay. So.
Lauren, go ahead.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna proceed with just a few things about the work groups. I will say, just for everyone to know, it's 6:41 right now. I had 30 minutes allocated for this. Maybe we can get through it more quickly. So the main purpose was to try to figure out who would want to serve on these different committees. And also perhaps to have them be almost like spokes off of our committee. One of the things that we talked about was sending an email via the select board to all the people who had expressed interest in being on this committee, who didn't make it onto the committee, to ask them whether they would be interested in serving on any of these work groups. And the other thing that we talked about was, as Donnie and Arian and I have been meeting after these meetings between, the Thursday night meetings to try to advance the agendas and the work. It would be super helpful if these work groups could agree to meet periodically and consistently
Mhm.
to report back to us. So that's kind of the framework that we were thinking of. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
that makes
John.
sense. Would that be just like communicating, like whatever was discussed in the smaller work group via email or, and like by a certain time so that you guys could lump it into
I mean,
the agenda?
Well, I would say, no, it's okay.
yeah,
I think it's basically doing the work
Mhm.
and reporting on it.
Yeah.
So there may be research involved, there may be, outreach involved to other groups.
Can I make just a suggestion?
Sure.
Go out there. I don't know if you're thinking potentially of maybe having a team leader for
Mhm.
each work group. And then maybe possibly like a really easy way to do a status report. It's something simple that just says the task this week is to focus on A, B, C. We accomplished A, B, C, and next week's, we're gonna focus on blank and challenges. I need help with blank, whatever it is, something
Mhm.
short, sweet. That can be presented back to folks and everybody knows who needs help, who doesn't, that type of thing.
I'm, is it correct that you're saying that that sort of gets reported out, not just circulated via email, but reported out live in these groups? Seems helpful. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the work group should be asked, maybe not every work group at each meeting, because there are a lot of different work groups, but if the work groups are at a point where they have something really tangible or substantive to discuss with us, then it would be great if they could send a representative of their group. Or have somebody here serve as the leader of their group so they can report in.
And it might be, at some point, it might be important to us from a scheduling aspect to know when is your estimated completion time, just, it can be broad and then they'll get narrower. But just to give an idea, because some things are going to have interdependencies
Right,
as we go through.
yep,
So,
that's a good point.
That's a good point.
Really good point. Yeah, okay. So,
Lauren?
yeah, yes, John.
other boards that I'm on are very similar. And each committee has a line item on the agenda each time. They may have nothing to report,
Okay, yeah,
but that way the entire committee is up to date on what's going on. And actually some of them require that to come in by writing, and that's distributed before the meeting. So there's no reason to spend 20 minutes making a report when everybody can read it.
right. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. I'm fine with that. Is everybody else okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, good point, John. Thank you. All right, so the groups that we talked about were a communications group. And I don't totally understand the question that's here, but does the communications group drive the schedule?
You just ignore
Yeah,
that.
yeah, we'll ignore that for now. But so I would say that, communications. I mean, maybe I'll just go through the list of these things and then maybe I can just give a little bit of perspective on what I think is involved in each one to the best of my ability. So communications, construction, costs and schedule, engineering and permitting, budget and financing, land lottery, lot sales, buyer education, housing development, design and management plan for common and community spaces, which is something we had talked about before, which might involve, cooperation with the recreation committee and the conservation committee and that kind of thing. And I just added here that, the attending select board meetings is actually kind of another subgroup that we're trying to want to pay attention to so that we make sure we have people. And then there was one other thing that came up, which Paula Emery brought to my attention. I'm not quite sure where it stands, but there's a big document that the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission just issued about information sessions about housing. And it might be good to have a representative from our group attend some of those, and I can get more information to you. I just barely read about those, but it seems like these different groups that have been involved in very intense discussions with all kinds of people, developers, you know, et cetera, have decided that they really have a need to have a consistent meeting where people get together and share ideas about housing and information. So I just bring that up. So, in terms of communications, what was involved in the past, I think is maybe a little bit different from what is involved now. Because when we were an ad hoc committee, we were basically just working on disseminating, we held an information session, a public information session. We held the design workshop, et cetera. We did the questions and answer document that's on the website, which is 50 questions and answers about the project. And we released those publicly on Front Porch Forum and Facebook, or, you know, to people who asked questions on our website. But I think this communications group, because we are doing an open meeting now and we're being recorded and we're releasing our minutes and our agendas, I don't know how much we want to rely on social media or whether we need to do that. But I do think that we obviously, Kirsty's part of the communications committee de facto because she's taking the minutes and will be disseminating those. And Kim is doing the video recording and releasing those. So I would kind of say that they're kind of de facto members of the communications committee. So I don't know if there are other people that want to serve on that committee.
I would like to.
Vicky, Kim, and Kirst. And depending on what else happens, I might want to serve on that committee as well. But it sort of depends on what else is going on. So
I would say,
Encourage that.
I would say that we should not discount social media and definitely make sure that we're using it, because one of the primary complaints about the ad hoc meetings were lack of information getting out. And the more ways we can put out information, the less chance we're going to be hearing that as feedback.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Would it make sense once minutes are approved to post them to Plainfield people in Front Porch Forum? Because that eliminates the barrier of having to go to the town website.
Yeah.
I mean, still have it on the town website,
Right.
but
Like post the link to it on the town website, or I don't know.
just post.
Yeah.
Either a link to the Google Doc, or if there's enough space, the minutes themselves, but I think we'll reach the character limit.
You know, if you post a link to the page where all the minutes are posted,
Yeah.
then people, you know, be able to get all of them. in that
Yeah.
one link.
And it's one source too, it's
Yeah.
contained, which I like
That's a
the
good
idea.
idea.
Yeah, I like that too.
This week's minutes are posted
I
here.
do think Bob Fancher wants a PDF document to put on the town website,
Yeah.
not a Google Doc, just as a.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we have Vicky, Kim, Christie, and possibly Lauren on that committee. Construction and engineering and permitting has basically been Rick and Sandy because they are the most knowledgeable about what's going on and have the tentacles out to the different estimators, engineers, et cetera, et cetera.
That's where my strength lies as well.
Okay, John.
I was actually interested in that personally, but I don't want to intrude.
I don't think intruding is
I don't think it's
possible.
That is definitely what I'm most interested in.
okay. You note that.
Yeah, I think there was a question under here that we discussed that came up at the last meeting and maybe is worth a little bit more conversation about in terms of what is our permitting process and who participates. And this came up within the context of George Springston asking to participate in the wetland delineation. And I think there were some there was some conversation about whether that normally some of these permitting processes are usually the engineer and the architect who are going through some of those things, and whether if we make the meetings public, that's not normally how they're done, and whether what what our policy would be as a group, I think essentially is a question. Yeah,
Right, I do remember, I think Liz, you raised that question last time at the
Yep.
meeting,
Yeah.
because.
Right, and in the case of George, he is a subject matter expert, so it's a little different than just some rando walking up and wanting to participate, you know?
yeah, but he's got an agenda, just to be very candid about it.
Oh,
you
of
know?
course, of course.
I think a distinction that I draw in my mind, which maybe you're seeing as well, I think like the construction, engineering and permitting work group could extend beyond those that are attending the meetings, like with, you know, outside providers or something. And I don't know how that would look, but to be able to like have more eyes on it after those conversations or professional services are rendered to dig into what's been provided.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah. I think that's a good idea. I would say that, you know, having sat in on a number of permitting meetings, oftentimes it's extremely technical. And like, you know, for example, dealing with stormwater is like, we put a sidewalk here and that runs off into this grass. Have we met requirement 404D of this particular protocol? And it's like, it is the engineer and the permitting person who are having those conversations.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, on the one hand, like, it's good to make sure that we're reporting out. On the other hand, having sat through a number of those, I felt totally unqualified to make any particular comments. And I also wouldn't want to make them so open that people show up and ask so many questions that they kind of go on forever, you know? So that, I think those are the cautions that I'm feeling as part of that process. You know, I think it's good to get, like, sort of have a little bit of a policy from this group.
Yeah, I think like, you know, I think one of the things is the Act 250, is it going to be exempt or is it not going to be exempt? I mean, that's something I think that needs to be reported out.
Totally, and if there
Right.
are, you know, things that like the DRB and the Act 250, you know, those are public hearings if those occur, and there's an appropriate process for that, and that seems much more accessible versus like the stormwater meeting is like, kind of should be between the engineer and the regulator, and, you know, I feel a little bit similarly about these wetland delineations in terms of, you know, you're looking at, you're taking small soil cores and looking at other plants and sort of dissecting them to determine where exactly this boundary is. And, you know, I guess, I personally, I just have a little hesitation about that being such a public process, but, you know, I mean, that's why I think it's a question for the group.
Well, I think we learn from it, right? So if they do the soil test and there's a reporting out of it, we'll see how much other interest is coming from the public in. You know, so I think we're gonna have to learn that as we go.
So like, if a working group exists, they meet with various engineers, the person who's heading that group up. They have the authority to go do this work, and then it's on the agenda for the next week, essentially. Seems fine to me.
I think so.
Yeah.
I do want to point out that this is a different process than any other process that you might have been part of before, because this is something that is a town project, not an individual group or nonprofit or anything like that. So I don't think we can automatically shut down folks wanting to be more involved. I think it does take more thought. And like John said, George is a subject matter expert. So it's not just someone wanting to go just to have fun or be nosy. I also do, I see George almost as like the protector of the land in a way. And if folks in town are worried that there is something on the land that is not being considered, this is a way to show the person who knows this best was there. They were able to say, check these parts. They did. Great.
Yeah.
So I just think that's worth considering in this specific instance, since he is a subject matter expert.
To be 100% honest, my concern was that if there's, like, I don't know, I mean, if there's some discovery of, you know, you're trying to decide whether or not we can shift, for example, the road on East Hill so that it's not blinding the neighbor across the street every time a car comes out. And that infringes, which Sandy very clearly stated, that any movement of that road, shifting it so that it doesn't go straight into the windows of the neighbor, it will infringe on that particular piece that is, I think, the coveted wetland area. And I am concerned that somebody's influence and hyper
Vigilance.
vigilant, thank you, that word. Might have some sway if something is like borderline
Can
and,
I pause? Because George is the one who actually suggested we move the road. He was the one that brought up those neighbors. He knows them the best out of anyone.
that's
that
good,
does
but I'm
that.
just saying, you know,
Yeah.
when you have somebody who has a vested interest and has,
Yeah.
like, I wanna come to this with a complete practical and technical look at something and whether or not it meets
Yeah.
the standards, not like a personal feeling, you know what I mean?
Well, he wouldn't be the person who is presenting the final product, right? It would be whoever is
No.
actually there. So I can't see a way that he would.
Maybe not, I'm just
Yeah.
saying, if there's something on the edge of like, we could go, it's kind of gray area, like, I don't know, I'm not sure how
Yeah.
gray this type of work is ever, but I feel like there's a lot of gray in the world. And if somebody's standing there making their case for why it shouldn't be a certain way, because they
Yeah.
have a vested interest in how it turns out for whatever reason.
I mean, I think
I'm
I'm
just
talking
trying
about a
to keep-
potential conflict of interest.
Yes.
Because George is not only a neighbor of the project, he has had reservations about the project. And so and I, you know, I totally respect his right to
Absolutely.
have those reservations and to,
Yes,
but I think that's what you're getting.
yes, thank you,
I would
thank
say
you,
it
yeah.
differently than George has reservations, because he was in my thread group, and so I had
Okay.
a lot of good conversations.
Sure,
about it.
yeah.
And George was more attempting to delineate things that he felt were important on the site. And I think this group all felt that keeping the option open of moving the road in this one particular case made a lot of sense. Now, that doesn't mean we have to do that or that we can afford to do that. More on that later.
Right,
But
that's a good point.
What it does mean is that if George can have political sway, which he may or may not.
Right,
And John can have political sway, which he may or may not. Then so much the better in this one case. But generally, I think it is not in the town's best interest to have a lot of people at a working permit session. Now, if we need to apply for political pressure because we think it's in the town's best interest, and we should do that strategically as a group and sort of head off individuals jumping into the fray, because that can make kind of a tangle out of things in ways that can't be anticipated by a lot of us.
Right.
And it gets really messy really fast. And so I have done a lot of public buildings and processes like this, and I do try to keep the owner out of the discussion as much as possible, because I think that professionals can advocate more strongly for the needs of the town often than individuals can. Unless political pressure is needed.
right, I just feel like, yeah, it has to be.
Does that make sense?
So some of this seems to me that is, I mean, this is fait accompli already, because George is gonna go on this trip, but I think what
Well,
to,
we could ask that he not as a,
He's an expert.
I was gonna finish and then you
yeah,
can.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that we're mapping out how we want to deal with things in the future.
Yeah.
More than this one situation. I'm not sure this, and then I wouldn't want to go there, Arian, but.
I just want to speak, I don't know George at all, but I've only listened to the comments everybody's making, so. But what I do hear is subject matter expert, and that to me means hopefully he's got the knowledge to go in there on the wetlands and take. And communicate to whoever he needs to regarding that, so I keep hearing he's good at that part, so that's all I'm gonna say, I don't know
I don't really know him. I know him by name, but it's, I
His
still,
expertise, he came and talked to, his expertise after the flood happened. And when we had this big meeting here, it was really pretty impressive.
Yeah.
It was.
Both him and Charlie
Yeah,
talked.
he's incredibly impressive, but that does not detract from the fact that
That if he has a possible conflict of interest, that's another story.
I think the same could be true for John and I. And we're involved in this,
Oh, yeah, I do too. Clearly.
right?
so you're appointed by the select board, working underneath the direction of the select board.
Yeah,
Right.
that's-
And
that
There, so there,
overrides.
that's different.
I think also like
Okay.
declaring a specific conflict in light of this particular decision, like you could definitely you could recuse yourself, you know, in this circumstance.
Well, I
Yeah.
think someone has mentioned already, I think it was you, that's in the past, this, we're moving into the future, so let's decide as a group going into the future how we might want to handle this, and I think Rick, you brought up, limited number of people dealing with the technical experts, and you're in the knowledge to know how it's usually handled, and you've mentioned how technical it is for people, to hear those conversations, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think the challenge becomes if we allow, I think it's not in our best interest to allow people to sort of have a privileged opportunity to, to have a conflict. I mean, and that's how I see this particular instance where it's just like, we are paying a wetland delineator to come and talk with the state regulator. And to have somebody sort of have that be their private audience feels like a challenging part of equal access to a public process.
And it can be worse than that. I have had an owner, and I wasn't present for this meeting, but my engineer was. Who stood in the middle of a brook and claimed that it was not muddy to, 5 wetland experts. And to everybody's eyes but his, that thing was flowing dirty and there was a problem that was not being resolved and he was making his case much worse. And that's what I really would like to avoid is jumping into the middle of something, not knowing how to approach it properly.
well,
Go ahead.
no, I mean. do
No,
you
I was
want
gonna
to-
just say, what's next? I was gonna throw it to you
Well,
in case.
do we want a decision on that particular point? or
Yeah.
Do we,
I mean,
Or-
yeah, I'm not hearing necessarily a consensus on this.
It didn't happen already, did it?
No,
No.
it's next
Okay.
week.
no, it's next week. That's
Okay.
why
Yeah.
we decided to talk about it one more time tonight. I don't know, should we? I mean, what's the appropriate
I don't
thing
know.
to do? Should we take a vote? Should we, is that?
Sure, I'm concerned about, my hesitation. I hear what Rick is saying, what you're saying about, you have a wetland, an engineer and a permitting person. My hesitation is I don't want to alienate people right now. I
Yeah,
mean, and,
sure.
I know George is not a friend, but I've known him for a long time. He's well respected. He's a
Absolutely.
smart guy. He's a
Incredible.
fantastic guy. That's my worry. I don't know how to measure that against the problem that you're pointing out of having the client at this thing. So I don't know how to vote on it. If we had a vote, I feel like I would have to abstain just because I don't know I don't know how to balance this. So.
In a weird sort of way, so do I. I was just thinking, oh God, I don't want to vote on this. because
No, I know.
It has
It
two
seems-
very important.
Yeah,
sides to
yeah,
it.
I don't like the
Here, and
idea,
I think
yeah.
that maybe it falls into this category of, well, if he and John can nudge the road over or as a possibility, that's a good thing. And if they can't, they're not gonna get anywhere with it,
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I wouldn't know how to vote either, Don.
Okay,
Well,
Yeah,
it sounds like maybe this is not the issue that we're going to try to solve with this discussion. It
yeah,
sounds like, and besides that, it seemed like at our first meeting, it was decided that it would be okay this one time. It feels wrong to me, just not because of George or anything like that.
Yeah.
Or it really has, it's all about process for me, but I'm not married to the idea, so I can, but I do think moving forward, it's really important to have in these cases, when you have actual experts who are paid to do a job and they're impartial, they're not in the community, I think that that's when we need to let them do their jobs. And, but if, you know, I think George participating
Yeah.
isn't
Alright.
going to be the end of the world.
So we're moving along.
Yeah.
I'm hearing I'm hearing a general sense that we're gonna let this instant go. And George gets to do this in the future. In the future, when we have this kind of study, it should be the professionals. That's what I'm hearing. It's 10 after,
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah.
How much more?
Okay.
The other,
Well, there were about 3 other committees that were listed here, and I think what would be great is if we can, it's 7:07 right now. If we can try to wrap this up within like 8 minutes or something, that would be fantastic. And so, what I'd like to do is just try to get a sense of people that want to serve on these other committees and then come back, we'll send out the email to the people that had expressed interest on serving in this committee and, you know, let people know these work groups are being established and see what feedback we get between now and our meeting next week. And then we can, you know, further develop these work groups and their charges and timelines as we go forward. So, the other, I think budget and financing was the third one, and I think that has to do, obviously, the construction and engineering has to do with cost and schedule, but I think we were talking about budget and financing, it was more about perhaps source of revenue.
The grants.
Yeah, and stuff
Yeah,
like that,
how do we make
so,
ends meet?
yeah, how do we make it meet? So,
I'm
I
interested.
guess I'm interested in that, so I think, I don't know. Anybody else?
I'd like to put myself forward as a helper on that if you want some
Okay,
Google Sheet / Excel code.
that's good. All right, anybody else? Okay,
I don't mind, I don't mind being involved in that, but I think, you know, just in terms of connecting to it, but, and I think that might be helpful, but I think I really want to focus more on number 3. Yeah.
construction and engineering.
Yeah, that's
Costs,
gonna be
yeah.
a fair amount of effort for more than one person.
Okay, land lottery. This is one that I think sounds really fun to be on.
That's certainly one that I'm interested in.
Okay,
I'm,
anybody else?
I'm interested in this, really in the crossover with communications, because it will involve like specific language and materials and that kind of thing.
Right, when you get to that point. After you develop, land lottery would be developing, you know, criteria for how are we going to,
Yeah.
you know, make
And
this
that
land
requires a lot of
available.
Research about what's going on now in various other towns.
And there's been, you know, there was some talk about, you know, a point system to give priority to people who were displaced by the flood. From Plainfield residents, Vermont residents displaced by floods, you know.
Yeah.
And so trying to develop some criteria, Bram suggested maybe
And-
adding a point for town employees, something like that, so. We would need
And
to develop.
Lauren, one of the prime questions that always comes to my mind when I hear that, and let me give my thinking here. As a private landowner, I can sell my land any way I want to within HUD law, of course. I can sell it to whoever I want to. I can choose whoever wants it. As a public entity, can the town discriminate like that? I don't know that that's going to be legal, and that question needs to be answered.
That was listed on the scope of work for the attorney that the town engaged.
Cool.
on the
We haven't
project.
gotten an answer then.
No, it hasn't been formally answered, but it's a very good question, John, and it does need to be answered. And
Is that
Okay.
Eli Emerson?
no, that's Amon's, Brian.
Brian Amons, yeah, okay, well,
So
that,
how
then,
it affects grants,
so you
because-
can, yeah, that's
Yeah,
a good point.
Yeah, there's nuance in there, and I
Yeah.
think, you know, there are with a lot of these things, it's like, well, you can do things where it's like, well, you can't charge somebody else more, but you can give discounts to certain people. Like, I mean, there's just like, there's certain ways that you can frame it such that you can, the initial conversation was, there's some ways where it's like, you can't, you could offer you know, oh, the lots are 25% less if you're already resident in Plainfield because it's a town project or something like that.
Okay,
But that deserves much more,
all right, so I had
in-depth explanation.
Jared on that, and then Kim for communications on that. And then the last one
Walker, I
was,
think, was interested in that
oh,
too.
Walker, sorry,
I could be a researcher on that project.
on the land lottery?
Mhm.
Okay, cool. And you said
Like,
helper,
research too.
I'm sorry, Kim, what?
Oh, I would just like to do a little bit of research too.
Okay, all right, and then there was design and management plan for common and community spaces.
Which seems like might actually happen a little later.
Later.
You and I were talking
Yeah.
about that, so maybe that's a little bit on hold because we need to know
I
what
think
the
we- yeah.
defined spaces are.
Yeah, I think we could put that on.
Right, we need the
Okay.
project to go
Okay.
forward for that.
Right.
Yeah, and know
Yeah.
that there is any
Right,
common land. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Okay, and then just in terms of the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission meetings, I will just try to send that information out that I have to everybody on the committee. And if people are interested in that,
It'd be good if
yeah.
at least one or two of us attended.
yeah, at least some of them, I don't even know how frequent they're gonna be, but they had a 28-page document and 2 pages was about that, so, all right, well, I think that's,
Other business?
Oh, I just have one. At some point, I don't know how many of you already walked the site, the 23-acre site, but I have not. And I would love to set up something, so for whoever hasn't. it would-
I'm gonna do it next month.
I know. I get you a little scooter. At some point, I'm just saying, down the line, it doesn't have to be right now,
Yeah.
just something.
I'll put that as an action item just to keep track of for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cause I think that's a really good point.
Okay.
yep.
Next step that we never assigned, writing the draft letter.
Oh, right, thank you.
Good, good.
Good point. Do we want communications to do that, or do we want a private individual? Just, I don't know.
How does communications committee feel about doing that?
What is the task again?
Writing to the congressional delegation about, the project in general, asking for their advocacy with grants. I mean, I
And
could,
particularly the disaster relief funding.
Right.
Making sure that we are able to fit in that box.
Because it's connected to the 2023 flood, not 2024. And so there's some debate whether or not Plainfield would qualify, so we would like our congressional delegate to put a little pressure on HUD.
I mean, I could do that if,
And
Yeah, if you're
is
good
that,
at
is
it.
everybody cool with that?
Yeah.
I am.
And you-
Okay.
I think you're
Okay.
in great position if you want an assistant or whatever,
Okay.
a second.
Yeah, let's say, 'cause I'll draft it and then I can show it to you, Kim, and then we can, I don't know, should we circulate it to everybody or just?
I think probably just to make sure we get like a thumbs up. from
I mean,
everybody.
that could be, one of the first things to go into the shared Google
Yeah,
Drive that
Oh,
people
yeah.
can look at
Okay.
and,
Does that have a
Add-
deadline? Do you think, I mean, I think by next week or something, by the next meeting?
yeah,
Yeah,
I
okay.
think we just
Okay,
email it to.
I feel like
Yeah.
that's
I mean,
a
it's,
soft deadline because
Yeah.
it's like,
well, it depends on what
whatever.
happens with the timeline that Karen was describing.
yeah,
that it
and
needs
whenever
to-
it reaches them.
Yeah.
It will.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's
Okay.
it.
Is, can I
Rick?
just ask one more question? I'm mid, stride with this cost estimate process, and there are other complications, and so I would like to, John, and respectfully say that it might be easier if we start up after I present this whole thing to the group next time, because it's gonna take a long time to get up to speed, if that's okay with both of you.
That we wait on what? That we,
But the cost estimate that we present this to the group first before we start.
doing the work.
Jumping in the middle of the process seems hard, like, let's wrap that
That's
up.
what I'm
Yeah.
thinking, that it's gonna be kind of a tangle and you're gonna wanna. Is that okay with you, John?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good.
Okay, great.
Okay,
So we have a next meeting, same time next Thursday.
That time.
Should we talk about meetings in May?
I think that's a good, I do think that's a good
Because we
idea.
need to reserve space, first of all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so we do have this space booked for the next 2 meetings on Thursday at 5, and with the attempt, I think we talked as a group, trying to keep these meetings to 2 hours unless there was a really big need.
I think we've done a pretty
Do
good
we
job.
want to look at something like doing an every other week meeting in May? Especially since we'll probably have some committee work that will happen in between. That was what we had talked about. And I think it was the second and fourth Thursdays were what we discussed as a possibility because it doesn't conflict with some other groups.
So that would be May 8th and May 22nd,
I think that's right.
which
Yeah.
is good because
If you-
I'll be back.
you don't think we need to keep meeting weekly in May?
I would have, I would say right now, maybe I think if we have these work groups getting stuff up to speed and we got 2 more of these meetings to sort of get our feet under us as a group. We can obviously revise that, but I would propose just in terms of people getting things on the calendar sooner rather than later, that we go to say, and does staying with the Thursdays,
Eighth.
5 to 7, does that work okay with
22nd.
everybody?
Yes, we could
Okay.
split the difference. There are 3 Thursdays in May. So we could do the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th. I'm sorry, there are 5 Thursdays in May.
The only challenge with that is that double check with a few other schedules of other town groups. And I think there are some other 1st and 3rd Thursdays. That's why the 2nd and the 4th were sort of the better choice. Just so that we're not,
May eighth and the
there's at least
22nd.
conflicts if possible with other town groups who we may need to meet with at some point in time.
Right,
Yeah.
Right. Well, why can we meet every Thursday in April?
Because, for example, the hazard mitigation committee meeting is not meeting the 3rd Thursday this month in this space. They're meeting somewhere else for a field trip or something like that. That's one example.
so why don't we just
Yeah.
go with the May eighth and 22nd?
We can always change
can
it, but
talk
let's
next
hold
week.
those times.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can fine tune it,
Second and 4th Thursdays.
which is May eighth and the 22nd.
Right.
Yeah.
And Goddard did get in touch with me and say that they'd be willing to give us a space now and again, but I think this setup.
It's such a nice setup.
Yeah, and with the Zoom and the,
It's also like,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's-
there's several of people who
freezing.
are walking to these meetings, which I think is a nice thing.
Right.
Yeah.
that's
Right.
true.
That's very nice.
Okay,
Okay,
great.
Should we adjourn?
I think we should.
happy whatever, folks.
We're adjourning. It's 7:18.
Perfect.